Imagine drifting into an endless blue horizon where every direction looks exactly the same. No compass, no radio, no engine, no rescue helicopters searching overhead, just a wooden ship, dwindling supplies, and the terrifying realization that nobody knows where you are. For ancient sailors, getting lost at sea wasn't simply an inconvenience. It was one of the deadliest situations a human could face. The greatest mistake ancient sailors could make was believing the sea was empty. It wasn't. Long before GPS satellites orbited Earth, experienced navigators understood that the ocean was filled with invisible clues. The challenge wasn't finding them. It was learning how to read them before hunger and panic clouded judgment. One of the first things sailors observed was the movement of the sun. From sunrise to sunset, its path helped establish direction throughout the day. When clouds covered the sky, experienced crews paid close attention to wind patterns, wave direction, and the movement of swells. Unlike surface waves created by local weather, long ocean swells could continue traveling from distant storms for hundreds of miles, providing surprisingly consistent directional information. The sea had a memory. If sailors knew the prevailing conditions of a region, they could sometimes estimate where they had drifted even after days of poor visibility. That required remarkable experience. Young crew members spent years learning from older navigators, memorizing seasonal winds, dangerous currents, and familiar coastlines. Knowledge wasn't written inside manuals, it lived inside people. When storms scattered ships or dense fog erased every landmark, survival depended less on strength than on observation. Those who noticed subtle changes often found their way home. Those who ignored them sometimes disappeared forever. Night brought a different kind of navigation. The stars became the map. Across the Mediterranean, Indian Ocean, Pacific, and North Atlantic, ancient civilizations developed sophisticated methods of celestial navigation. Sailors learned the predictable movement of constellations throughout the year, allowing them to estimate direction once darkness arrived. In the northern hemisphere, the star we now call Polaris became especially valuable because it appears close to the North Celestial Pole. Although it was not perfectly aligned with true north in the distant past, it still served as an important guide for many later navigators. Farther south, sailors relied on entirely different stars because Polaris disappeared below the horizon. Polynesian navigators created perhaps the most extraordinary star-based navigation systems ever known. Rather than depending on written charts, they memorized complex star paths, knowing which stars rose and set over particular islands during different seasons. Their knowledge filled entire lifetimes. A clear night sky became a navigation instrument more reliable than any piece of carved wood. Clouds, however, changed everything. Several nights without visible stars could leave even experienced sailors increasingly uncertain of their position. Every additional day increased the risk of drifting farther from familiar waters. Yet skilled navigators rarely depended on only one clue. They combined stars with winds, currents, birds, and the sea itself. That layered knowledge gave them a better chance of surviving when one source of information suddenly disappeared. Because the ocean almost never offered certainty, only probabilities. And ancient sailors learned to survive by making the best possible decision with incomplete information. Then came the enemy no sailor could negotiate with: fresh water running out. A healthy person can survive for weeks without food. Without fresh water, the timeline shrinks dramatically. Ancient sailors understood this long before anyone knew the science of dehydration. Every voyage began with carefully rationed water stored in ceramic jars, wooden casks, animal skin containers, or sealed amphorae. Captains calculated consumption as carefully as they calculated distance because wasting even a small amount early in the journey could become disastrous later. Once sailors realized they were lost, everything changed. Daily rations were reduced. Every unnecessary sip disappeared. Crew members were often instructed to avoid strenuous work during the hottest hours, conserving precious body water by limiting sweat. Drinking seawater wasn't an option. Its salt concentration is far higher than the human kidneys can safely process. The more seawater a desperate person drinks, the more water the body must sacrifice trying to remove that excess salt. The result is even faster dehydration. Some sailors survived by collecting rain. A sudden storm that terrified the crew one day could become their greatest blessing the next. They stretched cloth, sails, leather, or any available surface to channel rainwater into containers before a single drop could be lost. What looked like chaos became salvation. One heavy rainfall could extend survival for days. Without it, hope faded quickly. The ocean surrounded them with more water than they could ever imagine. Yet almost none of it could keep them alive. Food disappeared more slowly than water, but it brought its own dangers. Ancient ships usually carried preserved supplies rather than fresh meals. Dried fish, salted meat, hard bread, grain, olives, dates, legumes, nuts, and sometimes fermented beverages formed the backbone of long-distance voyages. These foods traveled well, but they were never unlimited. Being lost destroyed every calculation. A voyage expected to last 10 days could suddenly stretch into weeks. Captains faced impossible choices. Should everyone continue eating normal portions and risk starving together? Or reduce meals immediately, hoping rescue or land appeared before supplies vanished? Most chose strict rationing. Hunger became part of daily life. The psychological strain could be just as dangerous as the physical weakness. Hungry crews made poorer decisions, argued more often, and lost the mental sharpness needed to notice subtle navigational clues. Fishing offered hope. Sometimes, lines and hooks could catch valuable food, especially in productive coastal waters or where fish gathered beneath floating debris. But the open ocean often provided far fewer opportunities than people imagine. Success depended on location, weather, equipment, and luck. Every catch mattered, not because it guaranteed survival, because it delayed desperation. Ancient sailors knew an uncomfortable truth. The sea could feed you generously one week, then leave you staring at empty hooks the next. Getting lost wasn't just a battle against distance. It became a race against supplies that grew smaller every sunrise. The first sign of land often wasn't land at all. It was life. Experienced sailors watched the sky almost as carefully as they watched the sea. Certain birds spend nearly their entire lives over open water, but others must regularly return to land to rest or nest. Seeing species that rarely ventured far offshore could suggest that a coastline lay somewhere beyond the horizon. The direction of their flight mattered even more. Birds leaving the sea at dusk often headed toward land to roost. At dawn, many flew back toward feeding grounds over the water. Patient navigators learned these daily patterns and sometimes altered their course accordingly. Floating vegetation offered another clue. Fresh branches, clusters of seaweed, coconuts, reeds, or even drifting logs could indicate that rivers or coastlines were relatively nearby. None of these signs guaranteed safety since currents can carry debris for long distances, but together they painted a picture. The ocean whispered. The crew simply had to listen. Even the color of the water could reveal hidden information. Sediment flowing from large rivers often changed the sea's appearance, while shallower coastal waters sometimes reflected sunlight differently than the deep ocean beyond. One clue meant little. 5 clues pointing in the same direction could save an entire voyage. Ancient sailors survived because they gathered small pieces of evidence instead of waiting for one perfect answer. Then, there were the storms. No ancient sailor feared getting lost more than getting lost inside a storm. Powerful winds erased carefully planned routes within hours. Towering waves damaged sails, snapped masts, and sometimes ripped steering oars completely away from the ship. Rain reduced visibility until the horizon disappeared, making direction almost impossible to judge. Fighting the storm was rarely an option. Surviving it was. Many captains reduced sail before the strongest winds arrived to prevent the rigging from tearing apart. Crews secured loose cargo, reinforced ropes, and focused on keeping the vessel balanced against relentless waves. On smaller craft, sailors sometimes used sea anchors or improvised drag devices to slow uncontrolled drifting and help keep the bow pointed more safely into the waves. Every decision mattered. One mistake could capsize the vessel. One broken mast could leave the crew stranded long after the skies cleared. When the storm finally passed, relief didn't always follow. The sea looked unfamiliar. The stars might remain hidden behind lingering clouds. The coastline, if one had existed before, could now be hundreds of miles away. Many crews survived the storm itself, only to discover they had no idea where it had carried them. That moment of realization often marked the true beginning of their struggle, because surviving nature's fury was only half the battle. Finding home again was the challenge that tested every lesson they had ever learned. Sometimes the greatest threat wasn't the sea, it was panic. History is filled with accounts showing that disciplined crews consistently survived situations that overwhelmed less organized ones. Once sailors believed they were hopelessly lost, fear spread faster than any storm. Arguments erupted over which direction to sail. Some demanded immediate action. Others insisted on waiting for better weather. Every disagreement consumed precious energy and valuable time. Experienced captains understood this danger. They maintained routines even when the future looked uncertain. Watches continued through the night. Water was rationed at fixed intervals. Repairs were made as though land were only a day away. These routines weren't meaningless habits. They kept the crew thinking clearly. Modern survival experts recognize the same principle today. A structured routine helps people resist panic, preserve judgment, and avoid impulsive decisions. Ancient sailors discovered that lesson through experience long before psychology became a science. Hope had practical value. A calm crew noticed distant birds. A calm crew repaired damaged sails. A calm crew remembered the stars. A frightened crew often missed every one of those opportunities. When survival depended on observation, panic became as dangerous as hunger. The strongest ship in the world meant little if fear destroyed the people aboard it. Not every sailor who became lost wandered the open ocean forever. Many survived because they accepted an uncomfortable truth. The sea was stronger than they were. Ancient mariners didn't always fight winds and currents head-on. In many situations, experienced navigators understood that struggling against powerful currents wasted energy, damaged ships, and exhausted crews. Instead, they sometimes allowed prevailing winds or currents to carry them until more favorable conditions appeared. Patience became a navigation tool. This approach was especially important in regions dominated by seasonal wind systems. Sailors in the Indian Ocean eventually learned to plan voyages around the predictable monsoon winds, while Mediterranean captains often waited for more favorable weather rather than forcing dangerous crossings. Knowing when not to sail required just as much skill as knowing when to raise the sails. Nature couldn't always be defeated. Sometimes it had to be respected. That mindset separated experienced navigators from reckless ones. Ancient sailors who survived weren't necessarily the boldest. They were often the most adaptable. They understood that the ocean never rewarded pride. It rewarded observation, patience, and the humility to recognize when the sea had temporarily taken control. Those lessons were written not in books, but in generations of voyages that ended with ships returning safely to shore, instead of becoming another forgotten mystery beneath the waves. Even after every navigational trick had failed, ancient sailors still searched for one final advantage: the coastline itself. Long before detailed nautical charts existed, mariners knew that sailing blindly through open water was far more dangerous than carefully following a shoreline once land had been found. A coast provided fresh water, edible plants, sheltered bays, and opportunities to repair damaged ships. It also offered recognizable landmarks that could gradually reveal where they were. Finding land was only the beginning. Understanding which land had been found was another challenge entirely. Experienced captains compared mountain shapes, river mouths, cliffs, islands, and even the color of coastal rocks with memories from previous voyages. In the Mediterranean, Phoenician and Greek sailors became masters of coastal navigation, often traveling from one familiar landmark to the next, rather than disappearing into the open sea whenever possible. Every headland became a signpost. Every harbor became a lifeline. The farther a crew remained from shore, the fewer clues the ocean provided. Near land, information multiplied. The smell of vegetation sometimes reached ships before the coastline appeared. Bird populations increased. Water changed color. The rhythm of the waves altered as they encountered shallower seabeds. To an experienced navigator, the coast spoke constantly. To everyone else, it was simply scenery. Yet not every crew survived. Archaeologists have discovered ancient shipwrecks scattered across the Mediterranean, Black Sea, Red Sea, Indian Ocean, and other historic trade routes. Their cargoes, amphorae, anchors, pottery, metal ingots, and personal belongings offer silent evidence that countless voyages ended beneath the waves. Many wrecks were caused by storms. Others struck hidden reefs or rocky coastlines. Some probably became lost after navigation failed and supplies ran out. We'll never know every story. The ocean rarely returns its secrets. What we do know is that ancient sailors kept sailing despite those risks. Phoenician merchants crossed enormous distances to trade valuable goods. Greek explorers ventured into unfamiliar waters. Arab navigators mastered seasonal wind systems across the Indian Ocean. Polynesian voyagers settled islands separated by thousands of miles of open ocean, using knowledge carried entirely in human memory. Their achievements seem almost impossible today, not because they possessed magical abilities, because they trusted generations of accumulated observation instead of modern instruments. Every successful voyage added new knowledge. Every failed voyage became a lesson, remembered by those fortunate enough to return. The sea demanded payment for every mistake, and it rewarded only those willing to spend a lifetime learning its rules. The final lesson ancient sailors discovered may be the most remarkable of all. It wasn't about defeating the ocean. It was about understanding that no human ever truly could. So, how did ancient sailors survive getting lost at sea? Not through luck alone. They survived by combining dozens of small advantages that together, created a fighting chance against one of nature's most unforgiving environments. They read the stars when the skies were clear. They studied the wind when the stars disappeared. They followed long ocean swells, watched the flight of birds, examined floating vegetation, collected rainwater whenever possible, rationed food with ruthless discipline, repaired damaged ships before small problems became fatal ones, and relied on knowledge passed down through generations. Every decision mattered. Every observation increased the odds of seeing home again. The ocean rewarded those who remained patient. It punished those who acted carelessly. Ancient navigation was never about certainty. It was about reducing uncertainty one clue at a time. Modern technology has made that reality easy to forget. Today, a satellite can reveal your exact position within seconds. Ancient sailors had only their senses, yet they crossed the Mediterranean, settled the islands of the Pacific, sailed across the Indian Ocean, and connected distant civilizations long before compasses became widespread or GPS existed. Their greatest instrument wasn't carried aboard the ship. It was carried inside the human mind. Perhaps the most astonishing part of this story isn't that sailors became lost. It's that they kept returning to the sea. Every voyage meant accepting that storms could appear without warning, supplies could disappear faster than expected, winds could change direction overnight, and familiar coastlines could vanish beyond the horizon. Still, they sailed, because trade, exploration, migration, fishing, and survival depended on it. The ancient world was connected not by roads alone, but by countless sailors willing to trust fragile wooden vessels against an ocean that owed them nothing. Many never came back, but those who did returned with something even more valuable than cargo: knowledge. Every successful journey expanded humanity's understanding of winds, currents, coastlines, stars, and seasons. That knowledge spread from captain to apprentice, from parent to child, from one generation to the next, slowly transforming dangerous waters into recognizable routes. The maps came later. Experience came first. In many ways, ancient sailors weren't simply navigating the ocean. They were mapping the unknown with every voyage they survived. Their greatest discovery wasn't a new island or a distant harbor. It was proving that careful observation, patience, and shared knowledge could overcome fear, even in a place where every horizon looked exactly the same. When you look at the sea today, it's easy to see only water. Ancient sailors saw language, and the ones who learned to read it were the ones who found their way home.